We're going to get started. This is the first lecture that I do on the Zoom platform, so there might be some glitches. I'm sure we will have some fun here. But let's go ahead. One of the students who's attending in person is late. She emailed and said she was going to be 20 minutes late, so we'll see. The lecture today is going to be about picking a topic. And, you've already spent some time thinking about it, and you've already started to ponder what, what ideas you could develop and, how to go about this whole process. So we're going to look at a set of slides, and I'm going to explain in more detail how actually to craft a topic out. So I'll have a few announcements, I think, at the end of the presentation. But let's jump in right away. And now I need to do something that I've not done before, which is share a. Let's see. All right. So there you go. This should be it. So picking a topic. That's what we are talking about. And so let me first say that I am aware of the fact that it's a difficult thing. It's a little bit tricky in a very real way. So first of all, yeah, it's a high stakes decision. It's a all or nothing thing, because if you pick the wrong topic, your paper isn't going to be good, and you don't have all of the information that you actually would need to pick a topic, with the full, in the most effective way. So I made a joke on the slide. If you could pick the topic after you take this class, it'd be awesome, right? Of course, that would require time travel, and that's not a reality. So are we setting you up for failure? No, we're not. Okay, and the metaphor that I'm inviting you to use is that of bootstrapping. And you have a definition there, but basically it's in computer jargon. The idea is that you start by executing a very simple program. The only thing that it does is read a slightly more complicated program on your computer, which then reads an even slightly more complicated, and you keep doing this until you're booting the actual software that you need, and you're good to go, because booting the whole thing from scratch would be very difficult, okay? And that's exactly what we're going to do. It's one little step at a time, and by the end of the class, you'll be amazed at what you can actually do, okay? So don't panic, don't worry. In many ways, this whole class is a huge scaffold to getting you to do a good paper. Now, I want to give you a little bit of caution. I'm sure you've written many papers in previous degrees. You all have a BA at least, and you probably got very good grades on them, and I'm very happy for you. However, well, if your previous degree was an undergraduate degree, this is graduate school. And graduate school is not the same thing as an undergraduate degree. And you'll find out very, very soon if you don't know what I'm talking about. If you already have a master's, again, good for you. That's awesome. We're very happy that you have already all of that experience. And you certainly already have some skills that will come in handy for doing this class. However, well, linguistics is not the same thing than other fields that you might be coming from. And this is really valid if you come from English or education, right? Linguistics is very sciencey, okay? In fact, you know, we say that linguistics is the hardest of the soft sciences, okay? And why do we say that? Well, first of all, there's the distinction between soft and hard science. Hard sciences would be physics, mathematics, and the soft sciences would be sociology, literature, you know, those things. Well, because we have hardcore theory, often with mathematical underpinnings, and in the applied part, we use statistical methodology. So that makes us a very hard humanity. You know, so here you have what I just said. You know, the hard sciences: physics, mathematics, biology. Then in between, linguistics and psychology, and then on the right-hand side, literary studies, political science, sociology. These are soft sciences that don't have hardcore theoretical foundations. I mean, and not that there's anything wrong with that, okay? It's just, it's a different thing. And when you're traveling from this direction, from the right to the left, you're going to find that it's a little bit harder. Well, what if you instead have a degree from the sciences? Again, good for you. That's awesome. You know, but don't think it's going to be a piece of cake. You know, we've had a student who had an MBA, and that's, you know, finance, and you know, lots of math in there. And she said that the degree in linguistics was the hardest thing she'd ever done. The assumptions are different. The methodology is different. What counts as an explanation, as a meaningful finding, is different, at least in part. You know, and linguistics has its own specific form of argument. And you know, how do you prove an argument is not necessarily the same way that you prove an argument in another discipline. Okay, so all of this is to say, don't panic. You know, the job of this class is to take you by the hand and walk you across the finish line. But on the other hand, you got to take it seriously. It's not going to be a cakewalk for anyone. What I just said, don't panic if you don't know what the Hitchhiker's Galaxy, Guide to the Galaxy is. It's a funny book, science fiction, very funny, very well worth your time. You know, as I say there, it's another reason to have conferences. If you run into a problem, I cannot say this more often, talk to me, right? If you talk to me, I can probably fix the problem. If you don't talk to me, there's probably not a chance that I can do it because I don't know that it's a problem. All right, so let's move on. How do you decide on a topic? Well, first of all, ideally, you would pick something that is a gap in the literature. And what does that mean? Well, when you look at a discipline, there is a literature, articles, books, conference presentations, papers that have been written on the subject, right? And however, it's not that the coverage is, you know, uniform. Okay, people don't just go and research everything in that field step by step, systematically. They do. Some areas there's a lot of research, and in other areas there's less. Okay, so a gap in the literature is a topic that belongs to that area of research, but that for some reason has not been investigated. Hi, come in. You know, grab a chair and sit there. So as I said, some of the face-to-face students that are showing up. You know, if there is something that belongs to your discipline, the area that you're interested in, and that nobody has written a paper about that, well, then that's a good place to start your research, okay? Because it's going to give you originality, right? If nobody or very few people have researched a certain area, if you work on that area, it's going to make your work automatically original, right? And so that's a good thing, okay? Now, another option is replication studies. Replication studies are perfectly fine for a paper like the one that we're doing here. But generally speaking, depending on who you talk to, some people will not accept them for a thesis, definitely not for a dissertation, and you know, sometimes as a publication they will not want it because it's not considered to be original enough. Okay, but for this paper, it's perfectly fine. And a replication study is basically taking someone else's study and doing it again, right? And so that's what replicating a study is. And then you compare your results to the results of the first person who did the study. It's a lot easier because you already have all your methodology, etc., worked out. All you're doing is collecting the data and analyzing them. Okay, so another thing about a topic is that it should be interesting. Okay, first of all, to you, obviously, right? Because you're going to spend a significant amount of time talking about this and reading about this and studying it. You want it to be at least interesting to you. Otherwise, you'll be bored to tears. But also, it should be also interesting to other linguists. And this is usually going to be because it's either a topic of interest that other people are researching, and so they're interested in what your findings are, or because it has practical applications. So if you come up with a better way of teaching some phenomenon, then you'll see that people will be very interested because of the practical aspects of it. Now, conversely, you don't want your topic to be too interesting, okay? Because usually interesting topics are risky, and you know, because they are either very edgy or very challenging, or in the middle of a controversial field. And so by definition, if it's risky, it's dangerous, okay? So here I've got some examples of topics that are too controversial, okay? Because you know, you may be able to write a paper about a topic like that, but you may not be able to publish your paper, or you may not be able to get a job after you've published this paper because people are going to be afraid of hiring you. Okay, so there are some examples, you know, and by the way, some of these are actually real. So for example, I actually saw somebody give a presentation about the use of humor at Wiccan meetings, and this was a participant study where this person participated to these Wiccan meetings. She herself was a Wiccan, and she studied the use of humor to, you know, basically cope with the nervousness that came from being naked in front of strangers, because Wiccan meetings are done naked. Needless to say, that was a somewhat controversial paper. People were quite taken aback. The rhetoric of anti-abortion activists, okay, you know, the speech act of denouncing in left-wing pamphlets in the 1960s. All of these are topics that are inflammatory, okay, where you know that there are going to be people with very strong views against or in favor of these things. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go there, but as a student or as a junior faculty member, it's really not a good idea, okay? Because you don't know who's going to be reading your paper or looking at your CV, and and then say, well, do you want to hire somebody who's a witch? Do you want to hire somebody who's in favor of abortion? That kind of thing, right? So you're risking, you're putting yourself in the line of fire for no particular reason. Just pick another topic that's not controversial. There are plenty of topics out there. And if you really want to do a controversial topic, go ahead and do it. Okay. All I'm saying is, you should be careful. It's probably in your best interest to be careful. The other thing is it should be a manageable topic. And that's really the primary reason that you're doing these conferences with me and you're discussing with me the topics. The students tend to pick very, very broad topics that are hard to even conceptualize, within a semester, right? The running joke there is, the topic of my paper will be the universe and other minor subjects, right? Because of course the universe involves everything, right? So if you said I want to write a paper about implicature or politeness, I would say, what's wrong with you? There's thousands of papers written about this. You won't even have time to read half of them in a semester, let alone all of them, and getting a level of expertise such that you can write a paper about this. So, however, if you said, I want to write about, the differences in implicatures between Italian and English, all right, okay, so now we're talking about a topic that's way narrower and therefore much more amenable to treatment, okay? And we're going to talk more about narrowing down. That's really one of the core topics in this presentation, okay? So I said a minute ago that a good topic is where there is a gap in the literature, all right? So how do you know that there is a gap in the literature? Well, because you've done research, you've done your homework, okay? And so the way to do this is, well, guess what? Read the literature, okay? There aren't 100 ways of knowing what's in the literature except by reading it, okay? So you pick a topic and you say, I'm interested in implicature. All right, start reading about implicatures, right? As you are reading, you start realizing that some topics people have talked about extensively and other topics they haven't, right? So, you will then find out that this topic that people haven't talked about is a gap in the literature, right? So in other words, you need to get your hands dirty in the literature. You need to start reading the materials in order to find out where the gaps are, where the interesting things that people aren't talking about are. And often, I would add, this is a little tip, footnotes are where scholars put interesting topics that they don't have the time and the energy to go research. But then if you read it, you say, oh, that looks interesting. And then that will be a narrow topic. That's why it's in a footnote, you see. So how do you know what to read, right? I mean, you say, well, I want to do implicature, but where do you even find the literature on implicature, right? So now we're going to talk about how to decide what to read. Okay. Now, the first thing that we need to consider here is that hopefully you're not wanting to write a paper about a subject that you know nothing about. Okay, because if that's what you want to do, you're going to have a very, very hard time. Okay, and so I would absolutely discourage you from doing that. Now is not a good time to say, I've always wanted to learn about basket weaving, so I'm going to write a paper about basket weaving because I'm really interested in it. I've never read anything about basket weaving. So more practically, more usually, you're going to write a paper about something after you've taken a class in that field, right? So that you should have at least a general idea of what it is that you're talking about and you know what people are talking about when they say speech act, implicature, discourse analysis, you know, something like that, so that it doesn't hit you completely out of the left field. And by that very process, the stuff that they've dealt with in the introductory class generally will be the kind of topics that are going to be acceptable, are going to be interesting in that field. Okay. It also will give you an idea of what the basic fundamental, unescapable papers are. So if you're interested in implicature, well, of course, Grice is the place to start. If you're interested in conversation analysis, then Sachs is the place to start. If you're interested in speech acts, John Searle. If you're interested in politeness, Brown and Levinson. Okay, so those would be the fundamental works in the field, so you already will know that, and that's where you should start. Okay. And then, of course, you know, you can get yourself an introductory textbook, maybe the textbook that you use in the class that you took, or get an encyclopedia, or you know, that kind of thing, and you know, get yourself a little bit of a basic training in the field, and that's going to tell you where to start reading. Okay. Now, notice that I didn't mention Wikipedia and Google, etc. Now is not a good time to be using those tools. You know, we'll talk more in this class about when to use internet resources. This is not it. Okay, the internet is not filtered, so you don't know what you're reading. Whereas what you want is a textbook that's been vetted, that people have looked at, that editors have edited, and so on and so forth. Now, at this point, most likely you're panicking and you're saying, "Dear God, what have I done? I knew I should have done something simple like physics or rocket science." No. Actually, it doesn't have to be complicated. You know, it really is not. There was a song that was like, "Why does it have to be so complicated?" I think anybody who can send me the reference does not get an extra credit point. It doesn't have to be complicated, really. So, for example, you could write a paper about apologies in English and Italian. There you go. What's the difference, right? Can ITAs improve their perception of fluency by changing the intonation with which they deliver their lectures? Sure they can. All right, but you know, can you do some research on that? Students who read more perform better on a test. All right, you know, not earth-shattering, but valid. And if you can design an experiment and find information about this, you're good to go. Okay. So your topic can be very simple, very straightforward, can be very, you know, sort of accessible. It doesn't have to be crazy complicated. Okay. So when should you start looking for a topic? Immediately. Okay. You only have 15 weeks to write the paper in. That's a very short time. So you kind of need to compress the work that usually would happen in months, etc. It has to happen in weeks here. Okay. So start thinking about ideas that you're interested in. Think about topics that excite you, that you read about, that you thought were interesting. Think of special circumstances. You know, you may have access to special data, special people. You yourself might be, for example, bilingual, and so you may want to write about something that touches your experience directly. Or maybe you have small children and you want to write about language acquisition, you know, that kind of thing, right? I mean, there might be, or, you know, you might have access to a library that has a certain kind of data or books or things that are harder to access. I'll give you an example. A student was living in Spain, in a part of the country called Asturia, and she decided to write a paper about the Asturian variety of Spanish. and did a fantastic job because, of course, she had all the resources right there in the libraries of the capital of Asturia, which I don't remember what it was, but where she lived, right? So that was a very clever move. Talk to other people. You know, we have a discussion forum which is dedicated to this. Is the idea, you know, yeah, you want to be able to talk to the other students and to the instructor, that would be me, and say, hey, I thought of doing this. What do you think? And if people say, well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, you say, all right, well, maybe not. Okay, I'll do something else, right? I mean, right now, changing your mind right now is okay. Changing your mind in 2 months is a disaster, okay? So don't try to finalize your topic, okay? Just look for a general idea and let the topic come to you rather than try to push it, okay? And in fact, as I said, you know, you will engage in a process of narrowing down the topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. You know, so if you have a general idea of what you want to work on, so let's say sociolinguistics, you know, you start narrowing down the topic. And there is this thing called the funnel approach, which we're going to look at. But there's, of course, other approaches as well. The most obvious one is go talk to an expert in the field, okay? That's going to save you a ton of time because, you know, obviously they know by definition what is, you know, the stuff that you should read, the stuff that you can ignore, you know, what is the most important thing, where the gaps in the literature are, etc. So it can be a real boom. The problem with this is that, of course, it's hard to access the expert, right? Experts, by definition, tend not to talk to random people because they don't have a lot of time. They usually work very hard. They're very busy, right? You know, so generally speaking, they won't have time for a student, okay? But you might be in a condition where you have access to an expert, then take advantage of it, right? The other con is that also by definition, expertise leads to biases. Being an expert means having lots of biases that you worked your entire lifetime to prepare, right? So that may lead you to reject original ideas because you say, well, you know, nobody's ever done this, so it must be wrong, right? Not necessarily true, but it is not uncommon for experts to be resistant to new ideas, okay? In my experience, it's far more acceptable in non-American culture, academic culture, to go to an expert and be told what to do than it is in this country. In this country, there is this myth of I have to find my own topic, the topic that springs from my brain, and if someone else tells you what to do, it's somehow some sort of failure. That's not the case in many other cultures. But as I said, in this culture, it seems to be the case. So that might then you don't want to talk to an expert because if it will make you feel that you're missing out on, you know, fulfilling your own personal destiny, then it's probably not a good idea. All right, so let's talk about the funnel thing. As you can see, you start with a general area, so that would be sociolinguistics, for example. Then your next step is to do a literature review, which is to read about that particular field, and you narrow it down some, right? So you would say, well, I'm not interested in all of sociolinguistics. I'm interested in language and gender. So then you start reading some general articles about language and gender, and you say, well, I'm really interested in pronouns, and I see that nobody has talked about epicene pronouns, that is gender neutral pronouns. That's not true. They have talked about plenty, but I'm just using this as an example. So that would be identifying the gap where you say, well, not very many people have talked about X. And then you would design your study. What are you going to do to fill that gap or parts of that gap? You may not be able to do in one study the whole thing. And then finally, you will generate your research questions, right? That is, the idea is that at some point you say, I am going to try to answer the following questions in my study. Okay, so that's the narrowest point. That would be the tip of your arrow here, where you say, I am going to address these research questions right here. Okay, so there are other approaches that we would be remiss in not talking about, and especially the literature review is going to be probably very attractive to you. Because the problem with the pure research paper, right, the one that we just saw in the funnel approach, is that it's basically based on data analysis and data collection, data analysis, right? So it's a very narrow model that applies primarily to empirical sciences such as psychology and the like. But that's not the only model. There's other kinds of paper that can be written, obviously, right? So one of them is the meta-analysis, right? So what's a meta-analysis? Well, for example, let's say that you're interested in the use of implicature, the use of politeness, in Italian versus English. All right, so you would find every article that's ever been written on the subject that talks about Italian versus English implicatures, and so you'd read them. Then you reduce these studies to a set of variables where you would have a list of variables and factors that that particular article is looking at. So here it would be like, okay, so were the data collected in natural conversations, through interviews, that kind of thing? How many speakers were used, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you would have a whole set of variables. And then you perform a statistical analysis to see how predictive your overall, so you basically aggregate all of the papers into a big, large super study. Okay, and that's what a meta-analysis here. Now, the problem with this is that you need to have some serious statistics in order to be able to do this, because the statistics of a meta-analysis are non-trivial. Okay, so so that's a little bit rough, because if you don't know the statistics, then you can't do it. However, there is the other another choice, which is known as the literature review, where you're taking a different angle. So the idea here is not to produce new knowledge in the field where you say, I've done something nobody ever did, but to produce knowledge about the field, okay? So that basically you want to say, for example, I can tell you that between 1970 and 2000, 163 articles were published about the differences between politeness in Italian and English, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so that's called doing a literature review. You look at all the publications in a field, and you find trends, who's quoting whom, how is the field divided, what are the theoretical assumptions that underlie that field, and you sort of like look at analyzing the field and describing the field, so that you're explaining how did this field develop and become established. So we can now sort of wrap up the lecture. So finding a topic is not necessarily going to be an impossible task. You start from an area that interests you. You familiarize yourself with the literature. You narrow down to a topic that's relevant to you, where there is a gap in the literature, where you can say something that hasn't been said before. And then you start working on formulating a research question, okay? In my experience, students sort of run into trouble because they try to jump the gun. They try to say, well, my research question is going to be blah, right? And they do this before having read the literature, right? And then, of course, they discover that their research question is either impossible to answer, or way too complicated, or has already been answered, right? And so then they're like, well, now I don't know what to do, or they're in deep trouble because they're reading stuff that they don't understand, because it turns out that it's way more complicated than they guessed, right? Whereas if you follow the process that I outlined, and I should be able to share the slide. Yeah, so if you follow the process that I outline on this slide, you know, you won't run into that problem, because you will start with an area of interest. You're interested in speech acts, whatever. You familiarize yourself with the literature. That's the first step. Then you narrow down, you find a gap in the literature, and at that point, you formulate your research question, right? And if you follow these steps, it shouldn't be that complicated. And again, you can ask me. You can discuss it with the other students. You can say, well, I thought I was going to do this, but in fact now I'm finding that it's very difficult, so I want to switch to something else. So you can talk about this. The expectation is not that you already know exactly what your topic is going to be on day one. The expectation is that there is a learning curve. All right, so this concludes the lecture for today. So it was a short lecture, and everybody's going, yay, I'm celebrating right now. That's fine. Generally speaking, I can tell you this, in this class, the lectures aren't going to be super long. It's most about doing the research and doing the work, and then, of course, the conferences with the instructor. So let's have the face-to-face students introduce themselves. Come and say hi. Bring your chair, bring your chair. All right. What?
Hi, everybody. My name is Miriam Makoto. I go by Mimi. I am a third-year doctoral student here in the English program with a focus in applied linguistics.
All right.
Hi, my name is Whitney McCulley. First of all, I want to apologize to the class and
Don't worry about
it. For being late. This is my second semester in this program, and I'm enjoying it so far. It's been a very, very interesting task for me, because I'm a first-time grad student. So just kind of going with the flow of things, and I'm enjoying it so far. So
good.
Yeah.
All right, and so this is going to be the setup for these things. I'll be talking. They'll be making faces behind me, and so hopefully it will be fun for everybody. As I said, you can log in yourself. You could be talking to us right now. I put an announcement in the class. I will send it out next week as well. There are instructions on how to use the Zoom platform. You can do it on your phone or on your tablet, on your computer, pretty much anything. You can log into this class as it happens if you want to. I mean, obviously it's not a requirement. It's an online course, right? But you can be logged in and you can ask questions. You can say, all right, but I thought that I was going to do this, but now you said about this, so what, right? So you could be talking to us right now. All you have to do is put in that link and then open Zoom, put that link in, and it will take you here. And then It will be every Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. We've decided to make it a little bit later to make it easier for our face-to-face students to get here. And you know, we'll have a nice chat, hopefully a useful chat, and we'll you know, maybe we'll learn something. Hopefully, we'll learn something. All right, so let's say bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
All right.